Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be discussing the new Aeldari points on release, and if these point changes will change what is and what isn't played. So guys, we do have the updated points, the points that GW is going to change when the Aeldari Codex is released. Now, of course, we know that the printed points in the Codex that was leaked are not going to be the official points for the army. There are going to be some significant changes because this book was printed a very long time ago in relation to the balance of the game. So we are going to go over what has changed. Whatever stayed the same, we're not going to go into, but we are going to discuss the changes and if, of course, it changes anything really about what units we're going to take. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive in. So the first change, of course, and a lot of people saw this coming, was a Zurman, the old ass man, of course. And he is going from 120 to 135. He was printed at 120. Of course, we all knew that was a little too cheap for what he did. Still probably one of the best Phoenix Lords, even at that cost. He's amazing. I mean, giving your unit 6-inch, move, shoot, move in a codex that doesn't have a lot of that is pretty damn good. On top of that, Dire Avengers are a really good aspect warrior now as well. And this, of course, is very justified, and it's a small nerf compared to what I initially thought he was going to get pushed to, which was 150. He might actually end up being 150 pretty soon, but it won't be at release. So that is pretty cool. He's a great model. He does a lot of damage. And of course, he helps his unit out quite a bit. The next is the Avatar of Khaine. Now, the Avatar of Khaine was printed at 320. Now it's 300, so that's a 20-point buff. In my honest opinion, he really did need that buff as he's much weaker now, right? Strands of Fate was basically designed for models like the Avatar of Khaine. And of course, now that Strands of Fate is gone, of course, he's going to be a little bit weaker than his index version. Now, I will say this, the Avatar's ability to control the battlefield and, of course, his durability in general is much lower, right? Now, that to me is okay. I suspect, though, he won't see that much play because of it. It's just, he's simply too much of a liability. In the index, it was, fairly reliable that you could keep him alive for a couple turns. Now he's probably not going to survive if he's out in the open. And of course, a lot of players took him because he could survive out in the open. You're going to have to play him a lot differently. If you do want to use the Avatar of Khaine, he's not going to be that, just big stick of stats that you throw on an objective and hope it survives to score you points. You're really going to have to be much more patient with his use and use him more in the late game. Turns 3, 4, and 5, when the rest of your army has already killed a lot of your opponent's stuff, the Avatar can come in and clean house. He's really more of a sweeper unit now than he is a big durable beat stick. I still think, again, he could see some play, but at 300 points, I'm a little dubious. I think he may be just a tad too expensive for his durability and for the damage he can produce. But again, that's just me. Some clever players, of course, will be able to use him to a great effect. And I'm sure of that, of course. All right, let's talk about Bajaro. Bajaro went from 130 to 115. This was possibly one of the better changes just because, he is a strong Phoenix Lord, but he does need a move, shoot, move ability like the one granted in the Warhost attachment to be effective. If he's just standing out there in the open after he shoots with his unit, even though he has some great effects when he comes down, he basically auto crits. If you combine this with the stratagem in the Warhost attachment to get sustained hits 1, he's getting a ton of attacks. Half of them are auto wounding, and then half of them are going to wound normally, but, at a higher strength because his weapon is pretty good. Now, I suspect he will see a lot of play in the Warhost attachment with the unit of 10 Hawks and the ability to fire and fade, but I don't think he's going to see much play in other detachments simply because of just what I said, right? He can't go into transports with his unit, and unless he can actually move back after he shoots, there's not going to be a great place for him because Hawks are more expensive as well, and we will talk about that later on in today's video. Okay, next is Corsair Void Reavers. Now, this just made me laugh because Corsair Void Reavers probably got messed up mostly due to the fact that they do not benefit from battle focus and they don't benefit from a lot of the detachment bonuses as well. I mean, they really just don't fit in anywhere. I was surprised that we didn't see some sort of Corsair attachment or Outcast detachment. It is a shame. Maybe we'll see this come in later, but they got reduced by 10 points back down to 60 where they were. And I will suspect that they will see almost no play. Again, they don't benefit from any detachments really. They don't benefit from battle focus. And they don't benefit from any of the stratagems in a meaningful way. And the buff really won't help them much unless they become cheaper than Rangers. If they become cheaper than Rangers, then there's an argument to be made. But unfortunately, Rangers are still cheaper at 55. Rangers are better because they have a reactive move and they have, you know, in general, better weapons, I think. So Rangers, and that's saying a lot, by the way, because Rangers aren't great with their, you know, their Ranger long rifles aren't that good. But, you know, there it is, right? So Corsair Void Reavers, unfortunately, cool unit, really awesome, total crap in this codex. All right, let's talk about the D Cannon support weapon. Now, the D Cannon got increased by 15 points. Kind of weird. I think it's way too expensive for what it does without the built-in rerolls to hit and wound. And, you know, not having fate dice basically makes it really unreliable. And I really do suspect it won't see any play outside of maybe the Guardian Battle Host. I think Guardian Battle Host is pretty good because, you know, it can give it +1 to hit if it's firing on things on objectives. It has, you know, a couple stratagems that may be able to help it out. But other than that, you know, Farseers can't manipulate the D Cannon at all. So, you know, I just don't really see a point to the D Cannon anymore. I think they basically killed off the D Cannon. Luckily, though, the other two support weapons are pretty good. And when I say pretty good, I mean really good. So that's probably going to be, you know, what people take in general. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, oh my God, I glued on the D Cannon. What do I do, right? Do I sell the D Cannon? What do I do with it? Well, if you collected the bits, the spare bits from the box, you can, of course, cut off the tip. You'll notice that the D Cannon has a, you know, quite sizable, you know, tip on it. You can basically cut that thing off, circumcise it, if you will, and stick on the tip of the Vibro Cannon or the Shadow Weaver. And I don't think anybody will fault you for it. I really don't. And I think it makes a pretty seamless conversion. It's not perfect, obviously, but it will allow you to play in tournaments and stuff like that to where you don't have to worry about it. And of course, you can always magnetize the tips as well if you feel like, you know, that's something you want to keep. All right, let's talk about Dire Avengers. So Dire Avengers, guys, are kind of zeros to heroes in a way of the Codex. Now, I will talk about these guys later. I think they are better in certain detachments than others, obviously, but they did get a small points increase for the minimum sized unit. So 75 points now for 5 and 145 points for 10. So all in all, they got a 5-point increase from where they were, which I think is totally reasonable considering the power of a Zurman. So again, fantastic unit that works well with an Autarch and of course a Zurman. Autarchs give them a free stratagem, and the Foot Autarch in particular gives them a better agile maneuver roll. So every time they roll in the agile maneuvers, it's improved. I do think, though, that a Zurman is just straight up better for the Dire Avengers than an Autarch, but if you did want to run 2 squads of these, I think the Autarch on foot is a good option to throw in there as well. Now, here's the thing. They do want character support, but I can't see them being an auto-include without a Zurman. I think with a Zurman, they're going to be an auto-include in most competitive lists. Without a Zurman, I don't think they're a unit that a lot of people will go to, just because of the fact that they're kind of just good against infantry if they're not with the support character, right? You really do want to layer all those buffs on them. That's what makes them powerful. And, that's what's made Dire Avengers in the past powerful as well. I remember, back in 5th edition playing with these guys with Blade Storm and Guide and Doom, and that's really what pushed them over the edge back then, and I think the same thing is going to be true now. Okay, let's talk about Dark Reapers. So Dark Reapers did go up 5 points for 5, but they, don't pay an additional tax for going to a 10-man. And again, you probably want these guys as a 10-man because they're a really solid backline shooting unit with an improved Reaper launcher. So, the 5 extra points, not that big of a deal to me. And I also do suspect they will see some play in lists like Aspect Host and War Host. Of course, I said Battle Host here. It completely ignore me. Sometimes, I get these hosts mixed up. But yeah, in the War Host, with the Wave Serpent transport, they can just fire and fade back into a transport afterward and just call it a day, right? So I think you're going to either see these guys again in Aspect Host, where they can use that stratagem, Skyborn Assault or whatever it is, Skyborn Sanctuary, excuse me, so they can go back in that transport, or you will see them in War Host so they can just move back in the transport with Fire and Fade. Dark Reapers are very good. Now, I will say this though, you might not want to take the Tempest Launcher anymore. It just seems like the Eldar Missile Launcher is straight up better for the Dark Reapers, especially because you're going to want to be firing directly with these guys and bringing them in and out of a Wave Serpent like the old times. Remember how good they were in 8th edition? When you could move them in and out of a transport like that? Well, honestly, they're going to be the same way now. You're going to have to use them that way probably more than using them for indirect fire. I don't think the Tempest Launcher is bad at all, but I do think there are better options nowadays. All right, let's talk about Eldrad, Big LD. So Eldrad got increased by 10 points. This is a weird nerf for me because overall, I don't think his power level is that high, but I still suspect he will find his way into most lists due to his CP generation with the Mind War and Doom ability just being nice bonuses. You can put him in a unit of Guardian Defenders, screen your backfield, you can come out, Mind War, Doom something, and then they can use their ability, the Guardian's ability to, scoot back once they get shot at again. I also think Eldrad is a cool kind of inclusion in a unit that also has 2 Warlocks in it, so that you can get Fortune essentially on your unit so that the unit is tougher to, any kind of ranged firepower. But mostly you're going to be taking this guy for the CP generation. A lot of armies obviously love CP generation. Being able to spam stratagems that are really powerful is good. And I suspect he will find his way in the lists because of this, straight up. Okay, Falcon. So Falcon got reduced to 130 points, so it did get a buff. It is a justified buff considering it was 130 points before, and with the Battle Host rerolls that it had, plus Strands of Fate and all that, I just think honestly it did more damage back then. So that is a, justified buff. And it's a great transport, right? It allows you to reroll wounds in an army that now does not have a lot of ability to reroll wounds. So great in Howling Banshee units, great for a troop, of course, troop of Harlequins because of those dev wounds. Dark Reapers it's really good with, and of course Dire Avengers it's good with as well. I've heard people say that they want to run a Zurman with 5 Dire Avengers and a Falcon, so you can re-roll those wounds for a Zurman's mini feat turn, which is really powerful as well, and we might actually see the meta evolve into that eventually if Dire Avengers take a points hit, or if, a Zurman gets a little bit more expensive or something like that. We might see a change in the way people run a Zurman and Dire Avengers. But, that's for a later date. But anyway, yeah, that might be a good thing to do as well. All right, let's talk about the Farseer on foot. Got reduced to 70 points. This was a good little buff considering the Farseer did lose quite a bit of his power with his abilities. No longer does he have Fortune. He now has essentially Guide, but it's only a +1 to hit. So, that is good, but it's definitely not as good as Fortune, being able to -1 to wound on a unit, or just being able to reroll hits for the old Guide. Still a very good character though for the cost, especially in the Guardian Battle Host or Seer Council. I find that in those armies it's really effective because of the fact that, you're getting +1 to hit on objectives, and then of course you can change the Bright Lance platform to a 6th on the damage roll and stuff like that. I think that a Farseer is a good support character for its cost. The Farseer Skyrunner is somewhat the same. Again, considering he got a bit nerfed in terms of buffing power, because now he has an ability called Misfortune, which only targets an enemy unit that's now, all their weapons are at -1 to wound instead of, just making one of your units -1 to wound. And I think this was needed because of that, right? His ability doesn't quite work as well with Wind Riders. Old Guide was really good with Wind Riders, being able to just, kind of give them permanent rerolls to hits. And his ability now doesn't really work as well with them either, as their weapons have flat damage, but it does give them a free lethal or sustained hit, which is nice. I think the lethals are much better. By the way, guys, I know they can get scatter lasers, but I do think shuriken cannons are still just objectively better, because there's going to be more opponents where you're going to have to do more damage against them, right? Like, don't get me wrong, scatter lasers are great against guard, they're great against certain opponents, but the shuriken cannons are going to be the more well-rounded choice, and I think that's just probably what it's going to be. But I could be wrong. I think that the fact that, Shroud Runners have scatter lasers that are, hitting on twos, I think they are, or maybe I'm wrong on that, but they're, definitely the same cost, and they're arguably a better utility unit, means that you're probably going to see a lot more shuriken cannons on Wind Riders still. We also have the Fire Prism. Now, I really do want to talk about this a little bit, because I didn't talk about it as much in my leaked review. The Fire Prism guys got nerfed to 160 points. Only a 5-point increase, but that's kind of a slap in the face considering they nerfed it so hard in other ways. And I'm just like wondering, why did they do this, right? They were much weaker than the index version. They lost 50% of their linked fire shots, and they lost battle host rerolls. On top of that, they lost things like, fire and fade for vehicles. They do, of course, have fade away, which is the battle focus ability, but they're so fragile that if you run 3 of them in your army at 160 apiece, you're spending a lot of points, and the opponent, while you probably can cycle the prisms out so that they're never shooting at the same damaged prism throughout the game, there is a chance you're just going to lose a prism, right? There are models in the game that can one-shot prisms. So I do suspect fire prisms will not see much play until they go down in points. I think these guys are 135 or 140 at most. Let's take a look at Fagen. So Fagen got increased by 5 points, which is still a steal. It got nerfed by 5 points, but God, for 120, he was 130 in the index, right? For 120, he was a near auto include before with the Fire Dragons, and still is, really. He's really strong in all detachments, but extremely strong in Aspect Host and War Host. And basically, you just take this guy with a squad of 10 Fire Dragons, and it's a huge Death Star that your opponent can't really deal with effectively. I think Fagen is amazing still. Now, he did lose his Feel No Pain, but when you put him with Fire Dragons now, it's a little bit better. And really strong character overall, I have to say. Okay, now Guardian Defenders did get back down to 100 points. They were 110 in the printed codex, and now they're 100. It's a good buff, right? It puts them back down to their index cost, which is where they should be. They're a fantastic backline unit that gets very scary in the Guardian Warhost. Guardian Defenders, by the way, guys, can kind of create this Death Star. You can put a Farseer in there. You can put a Warlock, Warlock Conclave in there, up to 4 Warlocks in this unit. Then on top of that, you can put a support weapon in there. They have their heavy weapon. So Guardian Defenders can actually get quite Death Star-y if you want them to be. And in the Guardian Warhost, if your opponent kills, let's say 7 Guardians, really puts a lot of firepower into them, even with Fortune, even with cover and all that stuff that they could get. And, assuming you don't pop I think they have a 4+ invul save ability or something like that, or they have a -1, something like that, right? They have some sort of durability buff in the Guardian Warhost. And your opponent does kill like 7 of them, they could just go back into reserve, heal all their Guardians, and then come back into your backline once again. Guardian Defenders are a really good unit, and honestly, I think they're a lot more flexible than they were before. Not to mention that Overwatch that they can put out with 4 Warlocks. Okay, speaking of that Overwatch, we got Storm Guardians. They went down to 100 points as well. They're back down to the index cost, which makes them really efficient. These guys are the same kind of thing. You can't put a support weapon in them, but you can put 4 Warlocks in there. If you want to put Eldrad in there, or you want to put, a Farseer in there, you can do that as well. It's a fantastic unit for sticky objectives. It really makes it quite tough. And they become amazing in Guardian Battle Host because they can get the infiltrate ability if you want to. So you can infiltrate them up the battlefield with a bunch of flamers. You can get up to 6 flamers in the unit plus the Farseer. It's just absolutely insane what you can do with these guys as well. So these guys are really good. Will you see them in Aspect Host a whole lot? Probably not. You probably won't see them in Aspect Host unless they're just a minimum unit, just 100 points, cheap, sticky objectives. But you will see them a lot in Guardian Battle Host and possibly Seer Council because of the fact that they can just be picked up and moved anywhere on the board that they want to be. All right, let's talk about Howling Banshees. They did get increased to 90 points for 5 and 175 for 10. So once again, you're paying 5 more points for the minimum unit, but you're not paying any additional points for the max unit. And that's simply because you're losing that Exarch, right? So 5 more points, guys, is not going to prevent them from not being a super efficient unit into Space Marines. At 90 points, they slaughter pretty much every Space Marine unit out there on the charge. They're really efficient, especially in Aspect Host where they get a reroll 1s to hit. I mean, these girls hit on 2s, wound on 3s. Now, they don't have as many attacks, but the Exarch also has a damage 3 weapon herself. So, yeah, these guys are going to hit very hard. I believe these will be included in the Aspect Host for insane rerolls, and of course, an Autarch or Janz R joining them gives them a lot of synergies as well. Janz R is just amazing, but an Autarch is a decent choice too if you want to shave a bit of points. The Autarch, of course, also gets the Vice First ability in the unit, and the Autarch has a really powerful Starglaive that they can use to do damage 3. So, if you want to throw these girls into Terminators now, and you got an Autarch with a Starglaive, and you got an Executioner in there with the Howling Banshee Exarch, they can actually kind of take on Terminators and maybe not totally destroy every model in the unit, but they can certainly do a lot of damage to them and trade well up. Speaking of, let's talk about Janz R. She went down 10 points. So Howling Banshees went up a little bit, Janz R went down. She has fantastic value at 100 points, and she was good at 110 points, giving Banshees an insane threat range with an auto 6 advance and rerolls to wound versus character units. And that's what I thought was really insane about her, is that you don't even need to take a Falcon if you want to go after character units. Of course, you could have the Falcon just for even more threat range. I'm personally putting them in a Falcon because I feel like it's a good, defense against indirect fire. An opponent will look at a unit like that and automatically shoot it with indirect fire, I guarantee you. So having the protection is good, but also the fact that you get to reroll wounds is insane. They're already wounding on 3 with anti-character, but it gives them some flexibility. If you want to go after a mounted unit or, a beast unit or something that's not infantry and you don't get those, perhaps that anti-infantry 3+, you might want to be able to reroll your wounds. So really good in an Aspect Host with the strat support, but they're also very solid in other detachments because of, basically what I just talked about, them being just, solid damage dealer and a fights first unit that can heroically intervene and just absolutely destroy things nowadays. Okay, let's talk about the Skull Knight himself, Moggan Raw. So Moggan Raw got reduced by 20 points. I think this was needed. The buff did help him stay cost effective, but here's the thing, guys. This is just my take on Moggan Raw. I don't think he's going to find his way into most competitive lists. And here's why. I love the character. I think he's much better than before. Obviously, before you couldn't take him in the index because he just sucked so bad. But the reason why you're not going to see him in competitive lists is because his ability is just very easy to play around. When he shoots an enemy unit, first of all, a couple things have to happen. Your entire unit has to be able to draw a line of sight and target that enemy unit. If you are ineligible to target an enemy unit with any models in your unit, you're not going to be able to use the ability. The whole unit has to target one single unit. You can't split fire with this. And the whole unit, again, has to see. So you can't use the Tempest Launcher. I know it kind of seems like you can, but if the rest of the unit can't see the unit that the Tempest Launcher can, fire at because of indirect fire, you're not going to be able to use the Shrapnel ability. Also, the Shrapnel ability is on a 5-up. It procs on a 5-up, and, you may get D3 mortal wounds out of it. But let's say that the best case scenario happens and there's 3 units around the unit you're shooting at. You're most likely just going to be doing D3 wounds, right? D3 mortals, it's decent, but his other ability is just a -1 battle shock test. Again, not great. He has a decent shooting profile, but I just don't think he's worth the extra 100 points. I actually think that it's probably better just to go with the full unit of Dark Reapers and have that kind of Wave Serpent synergy so that they can move in and out of the Wave Serpent. I think that's a much better selection for you. Now, if you do want to play him, though, because he's fun and you love the model and that's great, put him in a unit of 10 Dark Reapers and just run him in the same way as you would a 10-man Dark Reaper squad out of a Wave Serpent. I think that's the best way to go for it because he's adding damage to the unit and he's not too much of a liability. He has a lot of points. And again, he's not efficiently costed for what he does, but it is cool. And I don't think he's going to lose you the game or anything like that. So you definitely want to go that route if you want to pick Muggen Raw up. All right, let's talk about this Night Spinner. So the Night Spinner got nerfed. I don't know why it sucked before, but it's now 190 points. It was already pretty useless at 180. Now even more so, especially the fact that we have Shadow Weavers that are way cheaper than the Night Spinner and way better. I highly doubt it will ever see play. This is an absolutely astronomically terrible nerf by GW, and it absolutely pisses me off. So yeah, Night Spinner, unfortunately, awful. Got nerfed, got its ability nerfed, got everything nerfed about it, lost dev wounds, and now it's even more points. Terrible. All right, let's talk about the Shadow Weaver, basically what's going to replace the Night Spinner for our premier indirect fire. It got increased to 75 points. This was obvious because at 50 points, it was just way too good. Way too good. I've run these things, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about this ability that they've reintroduced into the Codex. But basically, the Night Spinner in 5th edition had the ability that the Shadow Weavers have now. So it needed a nerf, in my honest opinion. I know some people will disagree, but it absolutely needed a nerf as they were way too cheap for what they did. Way too cheap. 50 points was insane. Still fantastic though. 75 points. It's going to be good in several detachments with the ability to shut down huge hordes and deal annoying chip damage throughout the game to infantry units. That's really strong. Being able to just tag, like if you pick up 3 of these units, it's 225 points. You're throwing out a lot. I think it's D6 plus 12 shots with blast. You're not going to have a very good AP value, but the great thing about these is that you don't need it because you tag an enemy unit and they have to roll every time they move. So if they move in their movement phase, a normal move or an advanced move or a fallback move, not the charge phase, but definitely in that movement phase there, they roll a dice for each model in the unit, and on a roll of a 1, they suffer a mortal wound. There is no cap to this, guys. There's no cap that says maximum 3 or maximum 6. They're just taking the full amount of mortal wounds that they roll. So let me tell you a little story about my 5th edition experience with Night Spinners. There were times in 5th edition where I was playing competitively in tournaments and things like that, and people would bring vehicle parking lots, and my Night Spinners were able to easily immobilize 2 to 3 vehicles a turn using this ability. But also when I would hit horde units, they'd have to roll 20 dice. On average, you think they only roll 3 ones, right, guys? But guess what? Usually what'll happen is your opponent it'll be a mind game for them. So sometimes they won't even want to risk losing that many models. And sometimes they might lose way more than just 3 models. They might lose 5 models. They might lose 6 models. And that's going to be absolutely insane. There's a lot of armies right now that Shadow Weavers are going to be very good against, right? So I think, honestly, it's really good indirect fire. Usually, if an army can take some decent indirect fire, they take it. And I think these Shadow Weavers will be very good in things like Guardian Battle Host as well as just, generally other armies also. Also, just plugging one of these into any list in particular is also just a good move. If your opponent has a large unit of cultists or another unit of guardians or anything like that that can, kind of be wounded rather easily by this model, it can provide some decent damage over the course of the game. So I really like the Shadow Weaver. Can't say enough good things about it. And I think it will definitely see its way into lists. All right, let's take a look at Swooping Hawks. They actually got increased by 10 points for 5, but they didn't get another increase for 10. So they do cost 160 points for 10 of them, which, do the math a little bit, it's just what they costed originally. So 75 more points. Now, they are very good value with Bajaro in the Warhost attachment and are a decent fast-moving shooting unit. That's about it, though. I think they're really not cheap enough to be expendable, so I don't think they compare well to other secondary scoring units if you want to use them that way. Units like Shroud Runners, Vipers, Rangers, Scorpions, etc. They're not going to be the unit that is going to be wanting to, constantly do secondaries all game or sacrifice themselves for something. I think there's better units for that. However, they're good in the Aspect Host. I will say that. If you want to run a lot of Swooping Hawks in the Aspect Warrior Host, I think they're very good. 3 units of 5 can be very effective with rerolls 1s to hit and lethal hits. But I'm just not quite there with them yet. I think personally, I just think that, the only good way to run them right now is with Bajaro and 10 of them in the Warhost attachment so you can fire and fade. I just don't like the idea of spending 85 points to come out and shoot somebody, maybe drop a few mortal wounds on them, and then say, okay, you can shoot me back, and then they just get obliterated, right? I just don't think they do enough damage, but I could be totally wrong. I think they're an okay unit. I just think they're better secondary scoring units, right? I mean, for 5 less points, you can get Shroud Runners. They're more durable than, Hawks. They do comparable damage against infantry type units. The only thing they're not doing is, they're not putting lethal hits out anymore. But they're also ignoring cover for the rest of your stuff, so that's also good. Vipers are arguably tougher against small arms fire, so they can, score you those objectives like Sabotage, where you need to survive a whole turn. Rangers are just much cheaper, much more expendable. Scorpions are cheaper and more expendable, and they're harder to kill. So, there's just stuff that I think is better than the Hawks for objectives. I don't think objectively Hawks are going to be able to do it anymore. That's just my personal take, though. But I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about Swooping Hawks. I think the best way to run them is just with Baja and 10 Hawks, and just come down, drop a bunch of mortal wounds, shoot the unit to death in Warhost with sustained hits and guide and all that good stuff, and then hop behind a ruin with fire and fade. I think that's the best way to run them. Okay, let's talk about the Vibro Cannon, the Vibrator Cannon. This is one of my favorite memes of the old index and of previous editions. This thing actually got nerfed. It got brought up to 60 points. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's still a reasonable cost for a unit that can get up to strength 11 and damage 4 with its range attacks, right? If you have 3 of these, it's 180 points. The first one is just shooting at strength 9, AP -1, and damage 2. Not that great. The second one is going to be strength 10, AP -3, damage 3. That's getting a lot better. And then the last one's going to be strength 11, AP -3, and damage 4. That's going to be pretty powerful. And if you roll with that big 6, that big, big D number 6, that's going to be a lot of damage. I think Custodes players are going to be shitting themselves when you roll that dice for the last Vibro Cannon. So, are Vibro Cannons good? I don't think so. I suspect it will only be usable in the Guardian Battle Host due to the bonuses the detachment gives these things. But I don't think they're that great, guys. I really don't. I keep wanting them to be good. They're definitely better than before. They're usable, right? They're usable. I just think that in the Guardian Battle Host, you need to have the +1 to hit to make these guys hit really hard. There's a lot of things you need to kind of account for, and I think Guardian Battle Host is the only real, only real detachment you can bring these guys in to where they'll have good use. So, yeah, I'm glad they're usable. I'm glad they're usable in some sort of detachment, but I don't think they're going to be some sort of auto include or anything like that. However, I'm going to be running a meme list of this at some point, and it's going to be hilarious, guys. I'm going to run 3 of these. I'm going to run a bunch of Guardians and Guardian Battle Host. It's going to be a great time. So, yeah, at some point I'm going to run a list like this, but I mean, for now, I just, they're probably not the best. All right, let's talk about the Viper. The Viper got decreased by 10 points. Really good change, by the way. I looked at the Viper, and when I saw it, I was a little bit underwhelmed at 75 points. I was like, really? It lost a lot, and it's still 75 points? So at 65, it's a really cheap secondary unit with a -1 to hit debuff that can, do some good against some targets. It probably did need this points buff with the loss of the, battle host rerolls from the index. It is a great unit in general, but it's even better now for secondaries and disruption. So I think it's just, in general, really cheap vehicle that is a little bit tougher than our, small infantry units that can perform secondary objectives and debuff enemy units as well. I think that's really what this thing is going to be used for. And by the way, guys, it's a lot better in Armored Warhost. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's cheaper in Armored Warhost. In Armored Warhost, it never got the rerolls anyway, and now it has a -1 to hit, which makes all your Wave Serpents and stuff like that more durable to enemy fire. So, yeah, I really like this thing in Armored Warhost. 3 of these things in Armored Warhost with Wave Serpents and with, your normal aspect warriors that are going to be in there, like Striking Scorpions. This is going to be hilarious, guys. Striking Scorpions and Wave Serpents that can scout 7. Beautiful. Chef's kiss, right? So, yeah, Viper is still good. I would suggest, probably taking at least one of these in your list if you can fit it in. Okay, Warp Spiders did get nerfed. They got increased by 10 points. However, again, their max unit didn't get increased by as much. I think their max unit actually still costs, if I'm not mistaken, 170. Yeah, 170. So yeah, it's not a bad change. They were probably a bit too efficient at 85 points, to be honest. They're still solid at 95 points. I think they will see their way into many lists accompanying Lycus, and they're a good enough unit to see play for hard to reach secondary objectives. I think you might see one of these units, if somebody's not running Lycus with the unit, you might see one of these units just as a vanilla unit with, kind of a shooting weapon. And that's simply because they are really fast, but it's risky. It's risky rolling that, those those 5 dice every turn for their flicker jump. So in general, I think you're not going to see as many of these guys as before, but they're still really good. I personally plan on at least running one unit with Lycus, and I probably want to try out a unit just by itself in other detachments as well. It's just a fast moving unit that can score me secondaries when I need it. All right, let's talk about the Wave Serpent. So the Wave Serpent was buffed. It was 120 points, now it's 115. It was great value before, and it's even better now with its better durability and re-embark synergies. Guys, the Wave Serpent got a huge glow up in the Codex. Now it basically has a permanent fortune against weapons that are, higher strength than its toughness. And guess what? It's toughness 9. A lot of weapons are higher strength than its toughness. So it's going to be much more durable to weapons like that. It does still have the 5+ invul save. And you're going to need at least 1 or 2 of these in every aspect-centric list. And it now competes on par with the Falcon. So, no longer are people saying, oh, the Falcon is just better for every unit. It's actually, comparable to the Falcon, and I would say that there's a lot of units that actually just want to be in a Wave Serpent. Things like Dire Avengers, things like Fire Dragons would rather be in a Wave Serpent that is a little bit more durable so that when they hop back into it, they don't just die immediately. I think a Falcon is still a good backline unit to launch assault units from. So especially units that are fast, like Harlequins, super fast units, right? So they're really good to, launch out of a Falcon. and howling Banshees are really fast, and they're good to launch out of a Falcon. But I think some of the shooting units probably want a Wave Serpent. So Wave Serpents are great, guys. I recently, bought one of them myself just because I know I'm going to need at least 2 in my list. Okay, now this was one of the changes that just boggled my mind. The Wraith Knight with the Ghostglaive got increased by 25 points from 395 to 420. I'm really not sure why this was nerfed. I really don't know. It was obviously the worst of the two options. The Titanic Ghostglaive is good, but it just seemed okay before in general, and now it's probably too expensive to consider playing in a Spirit Conclave list. And again, it was one of those things you really did want it in the Spirit Conclave list because of the stratagem support. But yeah, it just doesn't seem that great anymore. It's too expensive. 420 is kind of really expensive. The other one I think is 435, the shooting one, and it's much better, I think. Right? You give it a Sun Cannon and a heavy Wraith Cannon or 2 heavy Wraith Cannons and you just go to town on stuff. But yeah, absolutely Dumbo nerf to an already borderline unit. Again, GW is kind of wacko with some of these nerfs. You just don't really get why they did it. But anyway, yeah, it got nerfed, unfortunately. Maybe they thought it was too tough for the cost. But yeah, I just don't see what was the problem with it before. Anyway. Okay, the next buff is the Wraith Lord. So the Wraith Lord was 150, now it's 140. Now I'm going to tell you something about Wraith Lords, guys. They're really good. They're better than they were before. They're almost as good as that Phantasming Wraith Lord I told you about in the index, where it would, auto hit things and then it would run back with Phantasm with the Spirit Seer. Guys, it's almost as good as that. Okay, this is a really good unit that I considered strong at 150, and I think it's absolutely insane at 140. The ability to hit a target on a 2+ with Guide and a nearby Psyker, and yes, they do stack, guys. The Psyker, the Farseer, gives it +1 to hit with Guide, and the Wraith Lord's ability, Wraith Sight, gives it +1 ballistic skill and weapon skill when within 12 inches of a Psyker. So yeah, you have it within 12 inches of your Farseer, you cast Guide on something, and your Wraith Lord's Bright Lances are now hitting on 2s, and the Wraith Lord's ability is that it rerolls 1s to hit and to wound against a target of your choice at the beginning of the game. So if your opponent has a ton of vehicles, guess what? I'm rerolling 1s to hit and wound against vehicles. If it's monsters, I'm rerolling 1s to hit and wound against monsters. The crazy thing is even if you have 2 Bright Lances and your opponent totally goes the other direction, it has like a lot of bikes or a lot of infantry, you can still do anti-infantry, and you just have flamers. So you get +1 to wound with your flamers and your Ghostglaive. It's kind of insane the value that this model has, even in matchups where Bright Lances aren't the best weapon into the target. And you're only getting it for 140 points. I'm personally, in my Warhost list, going to throw 2 of these in there, put them next to a Spirit Seer so that they can get sustained hits 1, possibly sustained hits on a 5-up because of the stratagem. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, basically if you're within 12 of a target, in Warhost, the stratagem allows your sustained hits to become crit 5. So basically what happens is your Spirit Seer targets a Wraith Lord, gives it sustained hits 1, then use the stratagem, and because it already has sustained hits 1 via the Spirit Seer, it gives it crits on 5s. I know it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when you're hitting on a 2+, you might get an extra Bright Land shot out of it, right? So there's a decent chance, there's a better than average chance, I would say, that you're going to get a 5 on one of your dice. So yeah, pretty cool synergy there. I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's worth the CP cost, to be honest, but it's fun, and if you really need to put a lot of Bright Land shots into something, you can, and it's really good. And it also works for combat, right? You can charge in with the Ghostglaive, you give it sustained hits 1, I believe it does work with combat as well, and you're getting a ton of attacks. Again, hitting on a 2+ with the Ghostglaive. The Wraith Lord went from 0 to hero real quick. And I thought the Wraith Lord was decent in the index. It was good, I would say. was like a B tier unit, but yeah, now it's really good, especially with the synergies you can stack on it. So yeah, Wraith Lord is a big win, guys. All right, lastly, let's talk about the Ynnari Reavers. Everything else that I haven't mentioned stayed exactly the same. So the Ynnari Reavers got nerfed, guys. What the hell? 60 points to 70 points. Now, I do realize that in the Ynnari detachment, because they had movement 16, they were really good because of the ability of the Ynnari to move a unit when you destroy a unit. So you could technically move these guys 16 inches at the end of the shooting phase, you know, basically screen something out and then deal mortal wounds to something as well. I realize that's a really good combo for just 60 points, but it does feel like a silly nerf because it's like, you know, a lot of the Dark Eldar units got taken out, and then on top of that, you're telling me you're going to nerf one of them? Kind of stupid. But I think there's still going to be a great unit in the Ynnari with the ability to move 16 inches, with the detachment ability, deal a few mortal wounds while they're at it, and also screen out your opponent's stuff. So, by the way, guys, the Ynnari are a combat army that is very anti-combat as well, right? They're really good against other combat armies. And people are kind of coming along to the, you know, impression now that the Ynnari is actually probably one of the strongest detachments in the current metagame. And the reason why that is because you see a lot of armies doing really well in the fight phase, right? Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Grey Knights to a certain extent, Orcs, right? You see a bunch of armies doing very well in the fight phase, being able to just absolutely destroy Eldar armies. And the Ynnari don't care, right? The Ynnari are the honey badgers of combat. They don't care if you charge them. They're going to fight first. You have a bunch of Howling Banshees in your list. You got, you know, the Visarch with Incubi. You're going to fight first there. You got Reavers. So if your opponent shoots you and kills a unit, you're going to be able to move forward and just screen them out. And they have a lot of other tools like a permanent fight on, or not a permanent fight on death, but an automatic fight on death for units. They get charged for 2 CP. So even if your opponent does do everything right, ignores your other units for shooting, which by the way is just good. I mean, if your opponent's not shooting at your units and they're not using the full potential of their damage, you've already won in certain ways. And, you know, if they charge into you, let's say they charge into a unit of Incubi and they don't have fights first yet because your opponent did a good job at making sure they didn't have it, then you could just spend 2 CP and say, well, they're going to fight anyway, and they're going to kill your unit, right? So there's a lot of cool things in the Ynnari detachment. I just think this nerf was stupid. I don't think it should have been, but it is what it is. I think Ynnari is powerful, but I have to admit, address the elephant in the room here. Once again, I feel for you guys that lost your armies, that were running all the Scourges, that were running the Hellions in your list, and, you know, just running Ravagers and stuff. I'm sorry. Now, I'm going to make a video a little later, but I will say that this same exact thing has happened to me multiple times in my history of 40K and Warhammer. In 5th edition, I played a Dark Eldar Webway portal list that was based on having my whole army in reserve, except for a couple of units on the board to, of course, deploy the Webway portals, which back in the day was like essentially a Webway gate, but 35 points. So imagine the Webway gate now, how you can bring reserves out of it, and they could, you know, engage in combat and stuff like that when they came out of it. That was kind of like what it was in 5th edition, except it was only like 35 points. So you could have 2 of those in your list. You could drop those, and then on turn 2, you rolled to see if your reserves came in, and then they could basically, you know, come in on 4+ on turn 2, a 3+ on turn 3, and games back then could go up to turn 7. So chances were you would get all your reserves by turn 5. And I'm just going to say this. It was the most fun I've ever had with Dark Eldar in my entire life. And in 6th edition, the rules came out for 6th edition, and they said, no more reserves, guys. You can no longer charge out a reserve. And on top of that, you can only have 50% of your army in reserve. Overnight, my army was completely destroyed. I had to start afresh, and I had 2 choices at that point. Sell my army and start, you know, just building up my Eldar even more. Or the second option was I just buy a bunch of Raiders to protect my units and just play Raider and Venom spam. And guess what I chose, guys? I don't like Raider and Venom spam. I never really have. I've never liked that playstyle of Dark Eldar. I do use Venoms, they are good. But back then, it was like you basically had to get 6 Venoms and 6 Raiders to be competitive in 6th edition Dark Eldar. I just didn't want to do it. So I ended up selling most of the army. So that was a feel bad for me. And that's the same thing happened to a lot of you guys right now. And I totally get that. I'm also a victim, of course, of Age of Sigmar when they basically got rid of Warhammer Fantasy. They destroyed Warhammer Fantasy, changed it into Age of Sigmar, and basically none of my units could have been used in Age of Sigmar after that because I play dwarfs. And a lot of the units just weren't there, right? I could have proxied them, but I really didn't like Age of Sigmar anyway. I really wanted a rank and flank game, and I got bamboozled essentially by GW. So there's been multiple instances where I've been bamboozled in the same way. Now, for those of you out there who are wondering what to do now, thinking, oh, I should just quit Eldar or whatever. What I would do is I would do one or two things. A, you could use the Scourges, literally just proxy them as Swooping Hawks. They're literally almost the same model. Fix them up a little bit, turn them into Swooping Hawks, right? Your local game store will not care. That's option one. And the Ravagers, you could just say are Raiders. So that's something you could do, right? And Raiders, by the way, guys, are very good in the Yari detachment. You definitely want maybe some Raiders in there. I would say maybe even fill them with Capelites. I don't know. I think it could be good, but that's just me. Anyway, the next thing you could do, and this is a little more controversial, but you could do it, is just say, I'm going to use the index rules at your local game store because they destroyed my army and I just want to have fun. A lot of people will not be against it. They'll say, fine, use the index rules, no big deal, right? You could do that instead. The last thing you could do is you could sell all the stuff that you can no longer use and just buy the new units that you need. And that way you could generate some income for yourself so that you're not, in the hole when it comes to buying more stuff. Ravagers are still really good for Dark Eldar players. Scourges are really good for Dark Eldar players. They will want Mandrakes, by the way, are pretty much auto-include for Dark Eldar players. Those are all very, good models that Dark Eldar players want. So you can definitely sell those off and make money off those. And then, buy the Howling Banshees, buy the, more Incubi, buy, whatever you need to play Yari games with this current detachment and have fun with it. Right? So anyway, that's my advice. I totally understand it sucks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating. I'm not a GW shill and saying, oh, they did something great here. I'm just saying the detachment's strong. That's all I'm saying. I think it sucks that they, canned a lot of the units. There was a better way to do it. There was a more efficient and balanced way to do it. They could have changed the Scourge rule if they were really worried about move, shoot, move, right? But they didn't, and that's unfortunate. So, yeah. So that's my advice to you guys out there who play Yari, who are struggling right now. Okay, so in conclusion, let's talk about all the, kind of my final thoughts about the points changes. I think most of them are justified. And I know some people will complain, but some of the points were ridiculous. I mean, 50 points for a Shadow Weaver, I was like drooling when I saw that. And I was like, oh, too good, right? Obviously that got nerfed, but they're still good at 75 points. And I think the strongest combos of the Codex has to be, it's still good, guys, right? The strongest combos barely changed or honestly were offset by other points reductions. So you'll still be able to enjoy the full power of the Codex upon release. Like if you want to run a Zurman and 10 Dire Avengers, guess what, guys? The Waystorm got a little cheaper. So you're really only paying 15 additional points for that unit combo. That's great. If you want to play, Bajaro and 10 Hawks, well, the Hawks increased by 10 points, but guess what also decreased by 15 points? Bajaro. So they're going to be relatively the same cost. Banshees increased by 5 points, but guess what decreased by 10 points? Janz R. So that's going to be the same package, right? Also the, Falcon got decreased. So a lot of things that got increases, other things that go along with them that support them also got decreases. So you might find that your army is relatively the same cost. And I think that's a good way of balancing it, personally. So that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think about these point changes. Obviously, everything else stayed the same. Try to keep it somewhat positive in the comment section, guys. You know, I get it. You know, a lot of people lost their Avatar of Cain bully unit in the center of the board, but I have to tell you guys, you know, in competitive play, you know, if you're playing competitively, the Avatar of Cain was actually not that hard to deal with. And yeah, I understand you're upset about it, but the Avatar of Cain was never really like that before. And it was kind of weird in 10th edition that the Avatar could just, you know, soak up so much firepower. But in the later edition, armies were getting the tools needed to destroy the Avatar really easily. So I just think that was a losing strategy at the end of, you know, the index for Eldar. And I'm glad it's changed. Let's just put it that way. So I understand if, you know, you're upset by the changes, but, you know, codexes, they're not going to have all the same stuff. But you can still use the Avatar. The Avatar is still good, I would say. I just don't think it's an auto-include beast, you know, like monster that's going to kill half your army, kill half the opponent's army, and survive 2 turns of shooting. It's just not going to do that, right? But anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you do want to support the channel on Patreon and join our Discord, I'll leave the link in the description for that. We have a wonderful Discord with lots of cool people. And, you know, yeah, check us out. I'll leave the link in the description. You can join for free with a free trial and get in. Also, if you guys want to grab some Eldar inspired apparel, I have a channel store page for you, which has all the Eldar runes and stuff like that on it, on shirts, on sweatshirts, on mugs, whatever you guys want to rep your favorite faction. It's probably on the store. And then lastly, I am an Amazon affiliate, and I do have an Amazon affiliate link, which you can get the, you know, old Battle Force on, and you're probably going to be able to pretty soon get some of the new units on Amazon as well. I like Amazon for this because they have free returns, so if there's any problems with the boxes that you get, you can of course return it for a full refund and get another box exactly the same way, and probably within a couple days as well. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching once again, and I will see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.